Lucifer, the once most exalted of all the angels in heaven, was known for his immense beauty, wisdom, and strength. He was the shining light of the heavenly realm, a being adored by all of heaven. But as the days in heaven passed, something began to stir deep within Lucifer's heart, something that would eventually lead to his downfall. It wasn't that he was evil, at least not at first, but it was something far more subtle: pride. The kind of pride that arises not from a place of weakness but from great power and perfection. What could possibly go wrong when one is perfect? Lucifer's story, however, is not one of pure villainy, nor is it simply a tale of rebellion. It is the story of how something as pure as light can become as dark as night. How a being who had everything could desire even more, and how this desire would tear heaven apart. The great cosmic struggle between Lucifer and the Creator is more than just a simple act of defiance. It is the embodiment of the age-old question: how far will a being go when its own desires become its master? The fall of Lucifer is not just a tale of celestial betrayal, it is a warning. A warning about the dangers of unchecked ambition, the fragile nature of power, and the cost of losing sight of one's purpose. But what really happened? Was Lucifer truly a villain? Or was he simply a creature that sought to understand himself in a universe that was far beyond his comprehension? Did his rebellion truly stem from pride? Or was it something deeper? These are the questions that echo through time, questions that have fascinated scholars, theologians, and philosophers for centuries. As we explore Lucifer's journey from the height of his glory to his eventual fall, we must look at the forces at play. It is easy to call Lucifer a traitor, an outcast, or even a villain. However, the truth may be far more complex. To understand Lucifer's fall, we must first understand what heaven was like before it all fell apart. What was the driving force behind his actions? And what did he hope to achieve in his pursuit of power? This is a journey into the heart of one of the most complex characters in all of mythology. Before Lucifer's fall, heaven was a realm of unimaginable beauty and harmony. The celestial order was perfect, a place where beings of light and pure grace resided in unison. It was a world without sin, without the shadow of doubt. Lucifer was one of the most brilliant among them. His light shone brighter than any other angel's, his wisdom surpassing all, and his strength was unrivaled. He was, as the texts say, the most beautiful of all the angels, a radiant being whose very presence could command reverence. In this paradise, Lucifer was not merely another angel, he was one of the leaders of heaven, a close confidant of the Creator. His role was not only to serve but to guide and govern the legions of angels who inhabited this divine realm. His authority was second only to the Creator, and yet, this very power, this almost God-like influence, was the very thing that began to sow the seeds of rebellion. Lucifer's beauty and strength were unparalleled, but it was his mind that was his most extraordinary gift. He was a thinker, a philosopher at heart, constantly pondering the nature of his existence, the meaning of his role in heaven, and the vastness of the Creator's power. It was this very introspection that led to his first spark of discontent. As he pondered the structure of heaven, he began to feel that something was amiss. Heaven, despite its beauty and perfection, seemed too rigid, too orderly, and too controlled. The Creator, in his infinite wisdom, had created heaven with a purpose, peace, harmony, and unyielding obedience to his divine will. All of the beings within heaven, angels, archangels, and even the seraphim, were bound by one truth: that they existed to serve the Creator's will. This was an unspoken law, a law that governed every action, every thought, and every aspect of their being. Lucifer, however, was not content with mere obedience. His mind could not rest in a world where there was no room for questioning, no room for exploration, no room for growth beyond the limits set by the Creator. Over time, the thought began to haunt him: why should I, the most beautiful and powerful of all beings, serve this singular will? What if I too could shape my own destiny? This was the beginning of his rebellion, though at this stage, it was more of a silent internal struggle than a vocal outcry. Lucifer's pride began to swell, not because he hated the Creator, but because he began to see himself as an equal. He was not like the other angels. His intellect, his strength, his beauty, everything about him seemed to set him apart. If he was so perfect, why should he follow someone else's plan? Why should he not have the same autonomy as the Creator? Lucifer's mind, once full of admiration for the Creator's power, began to shift. The desire for self-determination began to take root. And yet, Lucifer did not immediately rebel. No, at first, he continued to perform his duties in heaven, guiding the other angels, leading them in their divine tasks. He played the part of a perfect servant, the epitome of obedience, all while a storm brewed silently in his heart. His pride grew, feeding on itself, and soon, it became unbearable. He began to resent the Creator not for his power, but for the limitations placed upon him. Why could he not make his own decisions? Why was he constrained by the Creator's will? Was he not worthy of more? As Lucifer's thoughts spiraled, his internal struggle began to take shape in subtle ways. He started questioning the hierarchy of heaven. He began speaking in whispers to the other angels, planting seeds of doubt in their minds. Why should we serve him blindly? He would ask. Why are we not allowed to question the Creator's will? Is it not our right, as beings of such great power and wisdom, to choose our own path? These words were dangerous. They were the beginning of a growing discontent, a whisper of rebellion that soon grew louder. But Lucifer was not alone in his thoughts. Over time, more angels began to share his doubts. These were not beings of evil or malice, but creatures like Lucifer, beings of great intellect and power who, like him, began to feel stifled by the limitations placed upon them. They, too, longed for freedom, for the chance to decide their own futures. Lucifer, in his brilliance, began to gather a following. These angels, who had once worshipped the Creator with unquestioning faith, now saw a new possibility, one where they could govern themselves, where they could chart their own course. In Lucifer's mind, this wasn't rebellion, it was enlightenment. He didn't see himself as the enemy of the Creator but as a liberator, someone who would free the angels from a life of servitude. In his heart, he truly believed that the Creator, in his infinite wisdom, had made a mistake by limiting the angels' autonomy. He had denied them their full potential. Lucifer, the greatest of all angels, saw himself as the one who could lead the charge to a new age, an age where the angels were no longer bound by the Creator's will but were free to carve their own destiny. However, as Lucifer's following grew, so did the consequences of his actions. The Creator, in his infinite knowledge, knew what was happening. He knew that Lucifer's pride had begun to blind him to the truth, and he saw the rebellion rising within the heart of his most trusted servant. The Creator knew that Lucifer's desire for independence was not just a simple wish for freedom, but a dangerous path that would lead to the corruption of everything heaven stood for. The perfect harmony of heaven could not be maintained if Lucifer's ambition was allowed to grow unchecked. The Creator had no choice but to act. And so, the stage was set for the greatest conflict heaven had ever known, a conflict between the Creator and his most trusted angel, Lucifer, a war of ideologies, a battle not for power, but for the very soul of heaven. As Lucifer's rebellion grew bolder, the question remained, would he be able to carry out his vision of a new heaven? Or would the Creator's will prove to be far more powerful than Lucifer's pride? As Lucifer's rebellion grew stronger, it became clear that the peace and order of heaven would soon be shattered. Lucifer, once the perfect and most exalted of all angels, had begun to amass a significant following. His ideas of autonomy and self-determination resonated with many of the angels who had, until then, lived under the unquestioned rule of the Creator. These angels were not malevolent or evil by nature, but simply beings who had grown disillusioned with the Creator's absolute authority. Lucifer presented them with an idea, a vision of a new heaven, a place where they could be free to shape their own destinies. At first, the rebellion was subtle. It began with small conversations, hushed whispers between like-minded angels, each yearning for freedom. Lucifer, ever the charismatic leader, spoke of a new era in which heaven would no longer be a realm of mere obedience. Instead, it would be a place of true self-expression, where angels could choose their own paths, free from the constraints of a creator who demanded absolute loyalty. It was a seductive vision, one that appealed to the desires of those who longed for more than servitude. The whispers of rebellion spread like wildfire through the celestial realm. More and more angels began to question the Creator's will, wondering whether they, too, could be as powerful as the Creator himself. What began as a quiet dissent grew into a full-scale movement, a war for the very soul of heaven. Lucifer, who had once been a beacon of light, had now become the leader of a rebellious faction determined to overthrow the Creator's rule. The Creator, of course, was not blind to the growing unrest in heaven. He was aware of Lucifer's growing influence and the rebellion that was beginning to take shape. The Creator had known from the beginning that Lucifer's pride would eventually lead to his downfall. But the Creator had also known that Lucifer's free will was a gift, one that allowed him to choose his path. Even if it meant choosing the wrong one, it was a painful reality, but one that had to be faced. In the face of the rebellion, the Creator called a meeting of the archangels, the highest and most trusted of his celestial servants. Among them were Michael, the leader of the archangels, and Gabriel, the messenger of God. These archangels were loyal to the Creator, and they had long stood by his side in the heavenly realms. They knew of Lucifer's growing rebellion, and they understood the gravity of the situation. The Creator, in his wisdom, knew that this battle would not be one of mere force, but one that would test the very nature of good and evil, freedom and authority, order and chaos. The Creator addressed the archangels with a heavy heart. He spoke of the betrayal of Lucifer, the angel who had once been his most trusted servant. Lucifer, he said, has chosen his path. His pride has blinded him to the truth, and he has led many of my angels astray. But we cannot fight this battle with hatred. For the forces of darkness that Lucifer seeks to bring into heaven are not merely physical, they are spiritual. His rebellion is a matter of the heart, and it is that which we must address. The archangels, loyal to their Creator, agreed to fight alongside him. They would not allow Lucifer's vision of a divided heaven to come to fruition. The war that would follow was not just a battle for power, it was a battle for the very essence of existence itself. Heaven, as it was known, could not survive if Lucifer's rebellion were allowed to succeed. But the Creator also knew that the war would not be won by force alone. It would require courage, loyalty, and the willingness to stand for truth in the face of overwhelming temptation. The battle for heaven began as a quiet conflict, but it quickly escalated into something much larger. Lucifer's followers, once mere whispers in the halls of heaven, now gathered in full force. They were led by Lucifer himself, their shining leader who had once been the greatest of all angels, now turned into a figure of defiance and rebellion. Lucifer stood at the forefront of the army, his wings spread wide, his eyes burning with the fire of his ambitions. Against him stood Michael and the other archangels, their ranks filled with loyal angels who had refused to follow Lucifer's path. The battle was fierce, with both sides locked in combat, each struggling to impose their vision upon heaven. The heavens themselves shook with the intensity of the war, and the very fabric of reality seemed to tremble. The skies were filled with the sound of clashing wings, the shouts of angels, and the thunderous roar of celestial forces. Despite Lucifer's great power, the Creator's forces were too strong. Michael, with his sword of light, led the charge, striking down any who dared to oppose the will of the Creator. Gabriel, with his silver trumpet, called upon the power of divine truth, sending waves of light to pierce the darkness that Lucifer sought to bring into heaven. The archangels fought with all their might, knowing that the fate of heaven rested on their shoulders. As the battle raged on, it became clear that Lucifer's forces were losing. His rebellion had caused great destruction, but the Creator's will was steadfast. The angels who had followed Lucifer began to realize the magnitude of the consequences of their actions. They saw that Lucifer's dream of freedom had come at a terrible cost, the destruction of the harmony that had once defined heaven. The very foundation of their existence was being torn apart, and many of the angels began to question whether the price of rebellion was worth the cost. But Lucifer, blinded by his pride and his desire for autonomy, refused to relent. He fought with all his might, determined to see his vision realized, no matter the cost. His wings, once radiant with the light of heaven, were now stained with the shadows of his own making. His mind, once filled with wisdom, was now clouded by the delusion that he could overthrow the Creator and reshape heaven in his own image. At the height of the battle, Lucifer and Michael came face to face. The two archangels, once allies in the heavenly realm, now stood as enemies. Michael, with his sword of light, looked at Lucifer with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "Lucifer," he said, "this path will only lead to your destruction. You were once the most exalted of all angels. Why have you chosen this path of rebellion?" Lucifer, his face twisted with anger and defiance, responded, "I choose to follow my own will. Michael, I will not bow to a Creator who seeks to control everything. I was made for more than servitude. I was meant to be free." And so, with a final clash of wills, the two angels fought. The battle between Lucifer and Michael was not merely physical. It was a battle of ideologies, of freedom versus order, of autonomy versus divine will. The clash of their swords was the sound of the very foundations of heaven shaking. The battle in heaven reached its climax with a final, cataclysmic clash between Lucifer and Michael. The skies burned with fire and light as the two archangels, once brothers in purpose, fought with all their might. Michael's sword gleamed with divine radiance, while Lucifer's form seemed to shimmer with the darkness of his rebellion. The sound of their conflict echoed through heaven like thunder, shaking the very foundations of the celestial realm. Lucifer, his heart burning with pride and the belief that he was in the right, would not yield. He had rejected the Creator's authority. And now, in his final moment, he believed that nothing could stand in the way of his vision. "I will not be cast down, Michael," Lucifer shouted, his voice filled with defiance. "I was made to rule, to lead, not to serve. You and the Creator have stolen what is mine. Heaven will be mine." Michael, steadfast and resolute, countered with a sorrowful gaze, "Lucifer, you were once the light of heaven, the most exalted of all. Why has it come to this? You were created to lead, yes, but also to serve the Creator's will. This rebellion will only lead to your destruction. Turn back now, before it's too late." But Lucifer was beyond reasoning. His heart had hardened, and his pride had eclipsed all else. He swung his blade, an embodiment of his defiance, against Michael's shining sword. The force of their clash sent shockwaves through the realm, splitting the skies and shaking the foundations of heaven itself. With every strike, Lucifer's once beautiful wings, now stained with the darkness of his rebellion, seemed to lose their radiance. The brilliant feathers, which had once been symbols of purity, now appeared as though they were being consumed by shadows. Lucifer's form, once the brightest and most magnificent, was now twisted by his inner corruption, the very embodiment of his pride and defiance. As the battle wore on, it became evident that Lucifer's rebellion was futile. Despite his immense power, he was no match for the Creator's divine will. Michael, with the full strength of heaven behind him, finally landed a decisive blow. His sword of light pierced through Lucifer's defenses, cutting through the darkness that had consumed him. Lucifer fell to his knees, his pride broken, his rebellion shattered. "Lucifer, it is over," Michael said, his voice tinged with sorrow. "You have chosen your path. and now you must face the consequences. The Creator, in his infinite wisdom and sorrow, looked upon the scene. He had created Lucifer with the greatest of love, knowing that Lucifer's free will meant that he could choose his path. For good or ill, the Creator had given Lucifer every opportunity to turn back. But now, the time had come for judgment. Lucifer's rebellion could not be allowed to continue, for it threatened the very harmony and order of heaven itself. And so, with a heavy heart, the Creator cast Lucifer and his followers down from heaven. The expulsion was not an act of hatred, but one of necessary consequence. Lucifer had chosen to follow his own will instead of the divine will. And as a result, he could no longer remain in heaven. The fall of Lucifer was not a swift descent but a long, painful one, as he and his followers plummeted through the heavens. Their light fading, they were cast into the depths of the universe, a place of utter darkness. There, Lucifer and his followers would be imprisoned, forever separated from the light and the glory of heaven. Lucifer's fall was not only a physical one but also a spiritual one. His pride had led him to believe that he could surpass the Creator, that he could be the ruler of his own destiny. In the end, his ambition had consumed him, and he was left to ponder the emptiness of his rebellion. The very thing he had sought, freedom and power, had only led to his destruction. But even in his fall, Lucifer's heart remained defiant. He would never admit defeat. I may have fallen, but I will never serve. He vowed in the darkness, I will find another way. I will rise again. But the truth was that Lucifer's fall was irreversible. He had chosen his path, and the consequences of his actions would echo through eternity. The angels who had followed him, too, were cast down with him, and they, too, would share in his rebellion and his eventual torment. Together, they would form a new order, one separate from heaven, ruled by Lucifer's pride and bitterness. In the aftermath of Lucifer's fall, heaven slowly began to heal. The Creator, ever merciful, allowed the angels who had remained loyal to him to restore the balance of the celestial realm. The light of heaven, though dimmed by the rebellion, began to shine brightly once again. And though Lucifer was cast down, his story would never be forgotten. His fall became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked pride, of the consequences of rebellion, and of the importance of humility and obedience to the divine will. But the story of Lucifer did not end with his fall. Over time, he became known as Satan, the adversary, the embodiment of rebellion and the adversary of all that was good and pure. His desire for power, his refusal to accept his place in the divine order, would lead him to continue his opposition against the Creator, and he would seek to corrupt the souls of humanity, tempting them away from the light of heaven and into the darkness that had claimed him. Lucifer's fall is a story of pride, ambition, and the consequences of defying divine will. It is a tale that echoes throughout history, reminding all who hear it of the dangers of placing one's own desires above the greater good, of choosing rebellion over harmony, and of seeking power at the cost of one's own soul. In the end, the fall of Lucifer is not just the fall of an angel, it is the fall of an ideal. A warning to all who seek to place themselves above the Creator. It is a reminder that no matter how powerful, no matter how brilliant, no being is beyond the reach of consequence. And though Lucifer's rebellion shook heaven to its core, it ultimately reaffirmed the eternal truth, that the Creator's will is absolute, and those who defy it will fall, as Lucifer did, into the darkness.